The church stood tall and proud, its stone walls glowing softly under the afternoon sun. Inside, the atmosphere was filled with excitement, chatter, and the sweet scent of white roses that lined the aisles. Golden ribbons hung from the ends of the pews, candles flickered on every side, and the music of a gentle piano played as guests whispered about how beautiful the bride looked. Cameras clicked, children giggled, and old friends hugged, all waiting for the ceremony to begin. To everyone there, it was the perfect wedding day, the kind that people dream about and talk about for years. But hidden at the back of the church was Michael, a 12-year-old boy with eyes full of fear and determination. Unlike the smiling guests, he was not there to celebrate. He was holding a secret, and in his hands was a simple brown folder that carried the truth, a truth that could ruin everything. Michael sat quietly, his legs shaking as he tapped his shoes against the polished floor. He could hear the laughter of the bridesmaids and the joyful whispers of the guests, but inside, his heart was racing so loudly it drowned out everything else. He kept staring at his father, James, who stood proudly near the altar in a sharp black suit. James looked happy, his face glowing with hope and love as he waited for Vanessa, the woman he believed would soon be his wife. Everyone admired Vanessa. She was elegant, graceful, and carried herself like a queen. Her smile was enough to win over anyone, and many in the room whispered about how lucky James was to find someone like her. But Michael knew the smile was a mask. He knew that behind the pretty face was a dangerous lie. Michael remembered the nights he spent digging for the truth. He remembered overhearing strange phone calls Vanessa made when she thought no one was listening. He remembered seeing documents hidden in her bag, names that were not hers, and messages that spoke about plans no child should ever have to read. He had spent weeks gathering evidence, snapping photos, copying texts, and finally placing everything in the folder he now clutched tightly in his hands. He had tried to tell his father before, but James brushed it off as childish jealousy, believing Vanessa was perfect. So now, on this day, Michael knew it was his last chance. If he did not speak, his father's life would be destroyed, and everything they had as a family would be gone. The music grew louder, signaling that the bride was about to walk down the aisle. All the guests stood up, smiling and turning their heads. The grand wooden doors at the back of the church opened slowly, and Vanessa appeared in her long white gown. The veil flowed behind her like a river of silk, and the diamonds on her necklace sparkled under the golden light. She looked breathtaking, and the crowd gasped in awe. But Michael did not move. His fists tightened around the folder as his stomach twisted in fear. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he feared the most. He looked at his father once more. James's eyes lit up when he saw Vanessa. He looked happier than Michael had ever seen him. That made Michael's heart ache, but he knew he could not stay silent. Step by step, Vanessa walked down the aisle, her heels clicking softly against the floor. The guests smiled, some even wiping tears of joy. The bridesmaids followed, holding bouquets of white lilies. The priest cleared his throat, ready to begin the ceremony. Everything was moving forward perfectly. Too perfectly. Michael felt sweat on his forehead, his breathing fast and shallow. He thought for a second about staying quiet, about letting the wedding happen, but then he remembered the phone calls, the fake names, and the plans written in Vanessa's own handwriting. His fear turned into courage. He stood up quickly, the sudden sound of his chair scraping the floor, cutting through the soft music. Every head turned toward the back of the church. Michael's small figure stood out in the sea of tall adults in elegant clothes. He held the brown folder high in his trembling hand. His voice, though shaky, was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Stop! Don't marry her!" The music stopped at once. Gasps filled the air as the guests looked at one another in shock. The bride froze in her steps, her perfect smile vanishing as her eyes widened in surprise. The father turned around, confusion written all over his face. He blinked at his son, not understanding what was happening. "Michael," James whispered, his voice breaking the silence. The boy's chest rose and fell rapidly, but his gaze did not waver. "She's not who you think she is," he shouted again, his voice stronger this time. People began murmuring, some covering their mouths. others whispering to one another in disbelief. The bride's cheeks turned pale under her makeup, and for a brief moment, her mask slipped, showing anger before she quickly forced her smile back. The priest looked uncomfortable, glancing from the boy to the bride and then to James. Guests began to sit down, their excitement turning into tension. No one had expected this. A wedding that was supposed to be filled with joy had now turned into chaos, and all because of a 12-year-old boy. Michael stepped forward slowly, clutching the folder tighter, his eyes fixed on his father. The folder seemed heavy in his small hands, but inside it was the truth that could not stay hidden any longer. James raised his hand slightly, as if asking his son to calm down. "Michael, what are you doing?" he asked softly, still in shock. But Michael only shook his head, his voice clear and firm. "Dad, you can't marry her. You don't know the truth." "But I do." The church was silent again, every pair of eyes fixed on the boy who had just turned a happy day into a storm of questions. The bride's smile was gone, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Guests leaned closer, whispering and waiting to see what would happen next. Michael took another step forward, his small hands shaking but his heart strong. He knew there was no turning back now. The wedding had begun, but the truth was about to change everything. The church was frozen in silence, as if time itself had stopped. Every guest turned to Michael, the 12-year-old boy who had dared to interrupt the wedding. His small hands gripped the brown folder tightly, his face pale, but his eyes sharp with determination. The bride, Vanessa, stood in the middle of the aisle, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Her smile had completely vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief and growing anger. James, the groom and Michael's father, stared at his son with confusion and worry. "Michael," he said softly, "what is this about? You're scaring everyone." Michael shook his head firmly. He felt the weight of every eye in the room, but his courage was stronger than his fear. He raised the folder high, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "Dad, she is lying to you. She is not who she says she is. She is hiding things from you, things that you need to know before you marry her." The crowd erupted into whispers. Some guests leaned forward in curiosity, others frowned, thinking it was some childish prank. A woman in the front row gasped and clutched her pearls. Vanessa's face grew red with embarrassment and rage. She stepped forward quickly, her voice sharp and full of panic. "Stop this nonsense right now. He is just a child. He doesn't know what he's saying." But Michael did not back down. He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers, holding them up for everyone to see. "I know exactly what I'm saying," he said loudly, his voice echoing through the church. "I found these in her bag. She didn't know I saw them, but I did. She isn't Vanessa Smith. That's not even her real name. She has another name, another life, and she's been lying to all of us." Gasps filled the hall again. James stepped closer, his face full of confusion. "Michael, what are you talking about?" Michael flipped through the papers, his heart pounding. He showed the first page. "This is her fake ID. It has her picture, but a different name. I looked it up, and that person doesn't even exist. She made it to look real. She told you she was a teacher in another town, but she never worked there. I checked. The school never heard of her." The room was buzzing with shock. Guests began recording on their phones, eager to capture the unbelievable scene. Vanessa's hands trembled as she shouted, "This is ridiculous. He is making this up. Don't listen to him." Michael's voice cut through her protests like a knife. "I also found messages on her phone. She was talking to someone about your bank accounts, Dad. She said once she married you, everything would be hers. She said she would finish the plan." He held up printed screenshots of texts, his small hands trembling. "She called you a fool in those messages." James's face turned pale, his jaw tightening as he looked at the papers. His breathing grew heavier. He wanted to believe it was fake, but deep down, doubt crept into his heart. "Vanessa," he whispered, his voice shaking, "is this true?" Vanessa's eyes widened, her voice cracking as she tried to smile. "Of course not. How could you even think that? He's lying. He hates me, that's all. He doesn't want me to marry you. So he made this up." But Michael wasn't finished. He pulled out a small USB drive from the folder. His voice grew even stronger, more confident. "I recorded her. One night, she was on the phone. "I heard her talking about you, Dad. She said once she had your money, she would leave. I saved the recording. Do you want everyone to hear it?" The church fell silent again. The weight of his words crushed the air around them. The bride's face turned white, then red, then pale again. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Her mouth opened and closed like she was searching for something to say, but nothing could cover the truth. The priest looked nervous, clutching his book tightly. Guests gasped and whispered louder, some shaking their heads, others glaring at the bride. The once beautiful ceremony had turned into a storm of suspicion and betrayal. James took a shaky step back from Vanessa, his eyes filled with pain. "Is any of this true?" he asked again, his voice louder this time. "Tell me the truth, Vanessa. Who are you really?" Vanessa's hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet, petals falling to the ground. She stammered, I can explain," but her voice was weak, broken, and everyone could hear the lie hiding in her words. Michael stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "You don't need to explain. I already know the truth. And now everyone else does too." The guests erupted into chaos. Some shouted in disbelief, others demanded answers. Cameras flashed, and videos were taken from every corner of the church. Vanessa tried to move toward the door, her face twisted with panic, but several guests blocked her path. She was trapped. James stood frozen, his heart broken, his mind spinning. His son had just torn apart the perfect image he thought he had. But deep down, he knew Michael was telling the truth. He looked at his son, tears forming in his eyes, realizing that this small boy had been braver than any adult in the room. And in that moment, James whispered the words that changed everything. "Someone call the police." The church exploded into chaos the moment James whispered for someone to call the police. The calm, joyful atmosphere that had filled the hall only minutes before was now broken into pieces, like glass shattering on the floor. Guests shouted, gasped, and rushed to whisper into each other's ears. Some reached for their phones, already dialing the police, while others began recording the entire scene, desperate not to miss what would become the most shocking wedding story anyone had ever witnessed. Michael stood firm in the middle of the aisle, the folder clutched to his chest like armor. His face was pale, but his eyes blazed with determination. He had spoken the truth, and now nothing could stop it from spreading. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, judging him, doubting him, but he refused to look away. Instead, his gaze remained fixed on his father, silently begging him to see the truth. James stood frozen near the altar, his mind racing. Only a few minutes ago, he had been filled with happiness, ready to start a new life with Vanessa. Now that life was collapsing around him. His hands trembled as he looked between his son and the woman he thought he loved. His heart wanted to believe Vanessa, but his mind told him that Michael's evidence was too strong to ignore. Vanessa, still in her glittering white gown, clutched her bouquet so tightly that petals began to fall to the ground. Her face, once full of confidence and charm, was twisted with anger. She threw the bouquet to the floor, her voice rising above the noise. "This is all lies," she screamed. "He's just a jealous child. He doesn't want me here. Don't listen to him." Her outburst only made the whispers grow louder. Guests shook their heads, some glaring at her, others shaking their heads in disbelief. One man shouted, "If it's a lie, then prove it." Another woman stood up, pointing toward Michael. "That boy has evidence. We all saw it. You're the one who needs to explain yourself." Vanessa's eyes darted back and forth like a trapped animal. She tried to move toward James, reaching out her hands, but he stepped back quickly, his face cold with suspicion. The pain in his eyes was clear. "Vanessa," he said in a low, broken voice, "if everything my son says is a lie, then show me the truth. Show me who you really are." But Vanessa had no answer. Her lips trembled, her hands shook, and her body froze. The silence in her hesitation was louder than any scream. The guests saw it, James saw it, and Michael saw it. The truth was written all over her face. The whispers turned into shouts. People demanded answers. Some guests even stood up and blocked the doors, making sure Vanessa could not leave. Others surrounded James, trying to comfort him, but he could barely hear them. His world was falling apart, and the woman he thought was his future was nothing more than a stranger with hidden lies. Michael, though young, felt the weight of the moment. His chest was heavy, his hands sweaty, but he stood tall. He had risked everything, being laughed at, being punished, even being hated by his own father, to tell the truth. Now that truth was spreading like fire through the church, unstoppable. Vanessa suddenly dropped her act. Her voice changed, sharp and bitter, no longer soft and sweet. "Fine," she shouted, her eyes blazing with fury. "You want the truth? Yes, I lied. Yes, I used another name. But I have my reasons. You wouldn't understand." The crowd gasped again, some stepping back in fear of her sudden change. James's face hardened, his hope dying in his eyes. "You tricked me," he whispered, his voice trembling with rage and heartbreak. Vanessa laughed bitterly, her voice echoing through the church. "You think you're special? You were just part of the plan. Do you really think I would waste my time on a man like you, if not for what I could gain?" Her words cut deeper than knives. Guests gasped, covering their mouths. Some shouted angrily, "How could you say that? You are heartless." Others booed, their shock turning into outrage. James felt his knees weaken. The woman he once loved now stood before him as a stranger, revealing her true self in front of everyone. His heart ached, but his son's bravery gave him strength. He turned toward Michael, his eyes filling with tears. For the first time, he realized his son had been right all along. "Michael," he whispered, his voice shaking, "I should have listened to you. You saved me." Michael's lips trembled, but he nodded, holding back his own tears. "I couldn't let her hurt you, Dad." Before anything else could be said, 2 police officers rushed into the church. The sound of their heavy boots on the marble floor silenced the crowd instantly. Their serious faces scanned the room, and one officer called out, "We received reports of fraud and possible threats." "Who is Vanessa Smith?" Vanessa's face turned pale. She tried to step back, but there was nowhere to run. Guests pointed at her instantly, shouting, "There she is." She lied. She tricked him. The officers moved quickly toward her. Vanessa raised her hands, shaking her head. "No, you don't understand. It's not what it looks like." But her voice was weak, her lies broken. The officers firmly took her by the arms, preparing to escort her out. The guests erupted again, some cheering, others murmuring in disbelief. James collapsed into a chair near the altar, burying his face in his hands. His world had fallen apart, but at least he had been saved before it was too late. Michael walked slowly toward his father, his small hand reaching out. James looked up, his eyes red, and pulled his son into a tight embrace. The boy had become the hero of the day, and everyone in the church knew it. But even as Vanessa was taken away, Michael felt uneasy. He knew this was not the end. People like her always had more secrets, and he feared this was only the beginning of something bigger. The heavy doors of the church creaked as the police officers entered fully, their dark uniforms and sharp voices cutting through the chaos like blades, and instantly the guests who had been shouting only moments before fell silent, the only sounds left being the faint sobs of a few women and the nervous breathing of everyone else. And as the 2 officers moved down the aisle, their boots echoing on the polished floor, all eyes followed them, watching every step as if it would decide the fate of the day. And Michael stood stiff, his small hands still gripping the brown folder, his chest rising and falling quickly as he tried to be brave, while his father James sat weakly on the front pew, his face pale and tired, his world broken, but his mind still trying to piece together everything his son had revealed. And Vanessa, standing in her white gown that no longer looked pure, but instead like a costume hiding her real self, was trembling, her lips tight, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out that no longer existed. And one officer spoke firmly, "We received multiple calls about fraud, false identity, and threats at this address. Can someone explain what is happening here?" And at once the voices of the guests erupted again, many pointing at Vanessa, shouting, "It's her. She lied. She tricked him," while others pulled out their phones, showing the officers the videos they had recorded of Michael's shocking reveal only minutes earlier, and the officers exchanged a quick look before turning their eyes on Vanessa, whose fake calm expression was already crumbling, and the taller officer stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us for questioning. Please don't make this difficult." But Vanessa shook her head wildly, her voice rising in panic. "No, this is a mistake. I am the victim here. This boy is lying. You can't believe him, he's just a child." And her shrill words echoed through the church. But no one moved to defend her. Instead, the crowd only muttered with disgust, their faces showing the betrayal they felt for being fooled by her perfect image. And Michael took a brave step forward, holding out the folder with both hands toward the officers, his voice steady even though his body was trembling. "It's not a mistake. Everything you need is here. The fake IDs, the messages, the recordings, I collected them. She was going to steal from my dad and leave him." And a shorter officer walked over, taking the folder carefully, flipping through the papers, his serious face not changing, but his eyes narrowing as he read line after line. And after a long silence, he nodded to his partner. "This is serious. We need to secure her immediately." And at those words, Vanessa's eyes widened. Her calm mask completely shattered as she dropped her bouquet to the floor, petals scattering everywhere, and she suddenly tried to push through the crowd, shouting, "No, you don't understand. I won't let this happen." But two guests, strong men in suits, grabbed her arms, holding her until the officers reached her, and with quick, practiced movements, the officers took control, handcuffing her firmly while reading her rights, their voices steady and cold. And the guests gasped, some even clapping softly, others whispering in disbelief as the glamorous bride was now nothing more than a criminal being escorted away. And James finally lifted his face from his hands, his eyes red but filled with a strange mix of sorrow and relief. And he watched silently as Vanessa was pulled toward the doors, her once confident walk now nothing more than a desperate struggle, her eyes darting toward James one last time, filled with rage and hatred, as if promising this was not over. And then the door shut behind her, leaving only silence and the faint echo of the handcuffs. And in that silence, James turned his head toward his son, his lips trembling as he whispered, "You saved me, Michael. You really saved me." And Michael, though still shaking from the weight of everything that had just happened, managed a small nod, whispering back, "I had to, Dad. I couldn't let her hurt you." And for a moment the church seemed to breathe again, guests lowering their phones, the priest standing frozen by the altar, unsure what to do next. And one woman whispered, "That boy is braver than all of us." And soon the whisper spread, with people nodding, their eyes filled with respect for the 12-year-old who had dared to speak the truth when no one else would. And James slowly stood up, his legs weak but his heart stronger than before, and he placed a hand on his son's shoulder, pulling him close in a hug that was both broken and healing, a hug that showed his gratitude and love. And the guests began to clap softly, not for the wedding that would never happen, but for the courage of the boy who had stopped it. And though James felt broken, he knew that his son had given him a gift far greater than marriage, a second chance at life without lies. And yet, even in that moment of relief, Michael's young eyes glanced at the closed doors, his mind whispering that Vanessa's story was not finished, and he feared the secrets hidden behind her lies might still return to haunt them. The church was still buzzing with whispers even after Vanessa had been taken away, the sound of her protests echoing faintly outside as police placed her into a car. And though she was gone from the room, her presence lingered like a heavy shadow, filling every corner with unease. And as the guests sat down nervously, unsure if the ceremony was truly over, one of the officers returned inside, carrying the brown folder Michael had given them. And with him was another officer who had quickly searched Vanessa's purse and belongings left behind in the bridal room. And he now held a small black bag that looked innocent from the outside, but was filled with dangerous secrets. And the taller officer cleared his throat, his deep voice cutting through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, this situation is not only about a failed wedding. This is much bigger. This woman has been involved in multiple scams across the state, targeting wealthy men, using false names, and vanishing once she took everything." And the crowd gasped, their earlier doubts turning into a wave of anger and disgust as they looked around at each other, realizing how close James had come to becoming yet another victim. And the shorter officer opened the bag carefully, placing its contents on a nearby table. And one by one he revealed passports with different names, but all bearing Vanessa's photo, stacks of credit cards, fake driver's licenses, and even a small flash drive wrapped in tissue. And when Michael saw it, his stomach twisted because he remembered how he had once seen Vanessa hiding something similar late at night, and he whispered to his father, "That's it, Dad, that's the drive I told you about." And James, though shaken, nodded as his eyes locked on the growing pile of evidence, his heart breaking again as he realized how completely his trust had been played with, and the officer plugged the drive into a small laptop he had brought, the screen lighting up with files, hundreds of them, each one containing names, photos, bank accounts, and messages, and the officer's brows furrowed as he scrolled, muttering, "She wasn't working alone. She was part of a network. Look at this. Organized fraud, planned marriages, even blackmail," and the words hit the guests like thunder. Some women covered their mouths with their hands. Others shook their heads in disbelief. And James felt his knees weaken as he whispered, "She never loved me. She only wanted what I had." And Michael, though only 12, placed his small hand on his father's arm and said softly, "At least now you know the truth, Dad. You can be free." And the officers continued to speak, explaining how Vanessa had changed her name 6 times in the last 5 years, how she had built a web of lies stretching across cities, and how she always targeted men who were vulnerable, widowers, businessmen going through hard times, or lonely fathers looking for love. And as each detail was revealed, the picture of Vanessa changed, completely, from the smiling woman in a wedding dress to a cold, dangerous manipulator who had nearly destroyed their lives. And the guests looked back on every moment they had praised her beauty, her charm, her perfect manners, now realizing all of it was carefully practiced, nothing real, just a mask she wore until her next victim came along. And one elderly guest whispered, "She could have fooled anyone, but not that boy." And soon many nodded in agreement, their eyes turning to Michael with quiet respect. And James wiped his face, trying to hide the tears that still fell, his pride wounded, but his heart secretly relieved, because now he understood his son had not only saved his fortune, but his very life. And the officers promised that Vanessa would be taken to the station, questioned, and likely connected to other open cases of fraud. But before leaving, they warned James, "She may try to contact you, sir. She has a history of threatening victims who expose her. Stay cautious." And those words left a chill in the air, because even though she was in custody, Vanessa's angry stare as she was dragged out still haunted everyone's memory, a reminder that her story was not finished. And as the officers packed up the evidence and prepared to leave, James stood in front of the guests, his voice weak but honest. "I want to thank all of you for being here today. I wanted this day to be about love and hope, but instead we saw lies and betrayal. Yet in the middle of it all, my son reminded me what love really means, and that is family, honesty, and courage." And the guests clapped softly, some even standing in support, and Michael, embarrassed but proud, lowered his head, not used to so many eyes on him. But his father placed a hand on his shoulder, pulling him close in front of everyone, showing the bond that had saved him. And though the church was filled with pain and broken dreams, there was also a quiet sense of relief, because the truth was finally revealed. And the mask of Vanessa had been destroyed, but deep inside Michael could not shake the feeling that this was not the end, that the secrets uncovered in that folder and flash drive were only the beginning of something bigger, something dangerous that might still come for them. And as he looked at his father, who was now thanking the officers one last time, he silently promised himself that no matter what happened next, he would stand by him, even if the shadows of Vanessa's lies returned. The night after the ruined wedding, James sat in his living room with Michael, the house still quiet from the exhaustion of the day. And though they had shared a simple dinner and tried to watch television, their minds kept circling back to the chaos of the church, the folder of lies, the fake documents, and Vanessa's furious eyes as she was dragged away. And just as James tried to convince himself it was over, his phone buzzed on the table. And when he picked it up, the screen showed an unknown number, but before he could ignore it, Michael leaned closer and whispered, "Dad, maybe you should answer. Maybe it's the police." So James pressed the green button hesitantly, and the voice that came through was soft, sharp, and chillingly familiar. Vanessa, speaking from somewhere in the darkness, her words coated with venom. "You think you've won, James. You think your little boy ruined me. But this isn't over, not by a long shot." And James froze, his throat tight, while Michael's face went pale as he tried to catch pieces of the voice from where he sat. And Vanessa continued, "You've embarrassed me, humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. But you don't know the people I work with. You don't know how far this goes. You were just supposed to be another step in something bigger, and now you've ruined everything. So let me make it clear, if you don't back off, if you don't stay silent, you and that son of yours will regret it." And then the line went dead before James could reply, leaving the room filled with the heavy silence of fear. And James placed the phone down with a shaking hand, his mind spinning, and Michael whispered, "She's still coming for us, isn't she?" And James, though his heart wanted to protect his son from the truth, could not lie anymore. So he nodded slowly, "Yes, but we won't let her win, not this time." And just then, headlights flashed outside the window, a car idling on the street too long. And James pulled the curtains shut, realizing Vanessa still had people on the outside, people who might be watching them right now. And he felt the weight of the officer's earlier warning pressing heavily on him. And that night, neither father nor son slept, every creak of the house making them jump, every sound of the wind making them think someone was trying to break in. And by morning, James decided he could not wait any longer. He drove straight to the police station with Michael, demanding to see the lead officer. And there he was told that Vanessa had been released on bail, her lawyers powerful, her connections deep, and though she was being watched, the police admitted quietly, "She's slippery, sir. If she wants to strike back, she'll find a way." And James left the station with a bitter taste in his mouth, realizing the fight was now personal, no longer just about scams or stolen money, but about survival. And in the days that followed, strange things began to happen. An envelope slipped under their doorway. Pictures of Michael walking to school, the car parked across the street at odd hours, emails arriving in James's inbox with no sender but filled with threats like, "You should have married me when you had the chance," or "The boy will pay for your mistakes." And though James tried to stay strong, Michael could see the fear in his father's eyes as he double-locked the doors every night, and Michael himself began carrying a small notebook everywhere, writing down details, times, faces, determined to help track what was happening. And one evening as they sat together going over the strange events, James said quietly, "She isn't alone, Michael. She told us that much. She's part of something bigger, and if we don't act fast, she'll destroy us." And Michael, though only 12, lifted his chin with courage beyond his years. "Then we'll fight back, Dad, the way we did before with the truth." And though James wanted to shield his son from danger, he realized the boy's bravery was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. And so together they planned their next move, contacting a trusted journalist who had once covered fraud cases, hoping to expose Vanessa's entire network before she could strike again. But deep inside, James knew the danger was rising, because Vanessa had lost her mask, her lies had been stripped away, and now she was driven by nothing but revenge. And as he closed the curtains that night, watching the shadows of strangers moving on the street below, he whispered to himself, "The war has just begun."